I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit, so that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Dan Smolin from What's Your Work Fit. Thank you for joining us today. We could not do this show without you. Your membership as part of this community, your viewership, your great questions make What's Your Work Fit a truly wonderful experience. So I thank you for that. You, our audience, is really what this is about. We are seeking to make work a wonderful part of your day, doing other wonderful things, which we consider a work fit. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You've come to us today on a truly wonderful live show. It's a great topic. We'll get to that and our wonderful guest momentarily. But first, a little housekeeping. If you are new to What's Your Work Fit, we live stream on two platforms. We are on LinkedIn Live, and you can use that blue oval button to follow us there, and that way you'll be apprised of new episodes that come along and other content. We are also on the What's Your Work Fit YouTube channel, and that is growing beautifully right now. It's a really terrific experience, so I encourage you to join us on either or both. We have many viewers who watch the LinkedIn live feed and then go back and watch the clips and the show playback on YouTube, just because that's how they roll. One other thing is that we have a new platform, and that's Substack. The What's Your Work Fit Substack is at dansmolin.substack.com. Currently, it is free to everyone. We are doing that as a courtesy to encourage more of you to join in and read our content. And as you can see here, the tabs will get you to live and recorded shows on YouTube, and also video clips on YouTube, and also our audio podcast, which drops every week. And one last thing that I ask you to do, if you enjoy the content and the experience of What's Your Work Fit, this is my ask. Please tell 5 of your friends to subscribe to What's Your Work Fit on the platforms of their choice. That's it. We'll get right to it. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all today our guest, Nancy Settle-Murphy. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Dan. Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Great to have you, and I'm really looking forward to this. Nancy is president of Guided Insights. I'm going to tell you briefly about her. She helps teams to get the most out of their remote and distributed work experiences as a virtual team alchemist. I love that. A facilitation skills trainer, a navigator of differences, a presenter, an author, and like me, a fellow founding member of the Future of Work Alliance. Welcome, Nancy.
Thanks, Dan. So great to be here. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I am honored to have you. I am such a big fan of your work. I want to start with a couple questions before we get to our main question today. First is, if you could share some background about your company, Guided Insights. What is it, and what is its value proposition?
Sure. I began Guided Insights 31 years ago from the ground floor of my house in Boxborough, Mass., which is about 35 miles northwest of Boston. And I primarily facilitate and design meetings, teach facilitation skills training, unconscious bias training. So training, coaching, consulting. And my real specialty since 9/11, to be exact, has become how to operate efficiently and effectively and enjoyably in the virtual world.
So you call yourself the OG of virtual work. And I think more than most guests that I've had on, you really know how to delineate distributed work and workplace experiences from the traditional ones. And I'm wondering if you could explain to people who maybe have heard the term hybrid or remote, what does it mean to have a distributed workplace?
Great question. Many companies, especially global companies, have had distributed teams in place for years and years and years. Some of my biggest clients, like HP, IBM, have been working globally forever. So to me, distributed is the umbrella term. And one way of having a distributed team is having an all virtual team where everyone works remotely from each other. One way is hybrid, where you have some people coming in either every day or some days to an office while others are remote. And then you have a co-located team where everyone is sitting side by side 5 days a week. So before COVID, we used to use the term distributed more often to mean people are distributed, work is distributed many places, including in satellite offices as well as major offices. Since COVID, I think the term that many have embraced to mean distributed is virtual. And now, of course, there's hybrid.
So let's get to the question. The important deliverables of work are shifting away from individual responsibility to team leadership. And increasingly, people are addressing how they can lead teams in a distributed workplace. So we'll get right to it. For the manager turned team leader out there, please answer the question, how do I lead my distributed team? Get us started, Nancy.
Well, that's a big question. I think you lead with authenticity, with empathy, with generous listening, and with an understanding of the dynamics of having team members scattered in different locations. So I'd say thoughtfully, carefully, and patiently would be some adverbs that come to mind.
So you talk about authenticity, and I think sometimes the term gets confused with virtue. I know a lot of authentic people that I would never want to do business with. They're authentically difficult to work with. But you did tee up the importance of trust. And I hear this from every member of the Future of Work Alliance. In working in team settings, when you have your team distributed perhaps across different geographies and time zones, you've got to start with the basis of mutual trust. Can you expand on that and explain why that's important?
Sure. And I think we want to talk about both the trust between the team leader and team members and the trust that the team leader helps build across the team. Both are really important. And both are a lot harder to do in a world where you don't have many opportunities, certainly to meet face to face, but few opportunities to have real-time conversations. And so building trust becomes a lot harder without those frequent connections. Also, the tendency to micromanage is much greater in a virtual world or in a distributed world where I'm the manager. I don't really know how you're doing on this work and I'm panicking because we have a deadline and I have no idea what the status is. So it's super easy to micromanage by sending texts or IMs, or less often the case is calls or emails. And so that attitude of micromanaging is a way to bust trust. And I do want to say, once trust has been broken in a virtual team and in a distributed team, it's so much harder to make reparations because I don't know how my behavior has been received by you and vice versa. And it's very awkward oftentimes to approach the other person and say, hey, what you said in that meeting, I didn't know what to read into that. We often just say, well, often make the ungenerous assumptions, and then the trust is breached even further.
So I mentioned to you before the show went live that I had experience placing some people who were retired military. One guy in particular was a platoon leader in Iraq, and he transitioned beautifully to the private sector as a team lead. And this is going back 2008, 2010. And why is that? Because as a platoon leader, he had to make sure that everybody lived up to what they needed to do because their lives depended upon it. If you want to drive something home to a platoon leader, it's just that. I need to make sure I'm communicating well with you, that I know that you understand the deliverable, and that I know that you have my trust, that I've trained you well, you will execute perfectly well. So most of my career in recruiting had been in placing what I'll term old school managers. It doesn't mean they were old. It just means they echoed a traditional notion of top-down ideation and top-down command structure. This is the deliverable. This is the P&L that we got to manage to. This is the sales bogey that we have to meet or exceed. This is how you need to do it. Go do it. And I think that worked fairly well when people were co-located. And if something wasn't going right, you could pull somebody aside in a room and talk to them. Now introduce a distributed workplace where Nancy Settle-Murphy is up in Boxborough, Mass. Dan is down in Northern Virginia. Other members are across the planet in different time zones. And now it gets increasingly more difficult to make that happen. So I want to get to Ben's question first, which is, I am a new team lead with 5 distributed team members. How do we determine how and when to meet up in real life versus how to do it virtually or in a distributed fashion? Can we get him started on that?
Sure. And I assume in real life means in person, because
in person.
Because I try not to equate the two, because I think virtual's in real life too, but in person. So I would say, first of all, at a team kickoff or a team formation, or if it's a team that is being formed to start a big project, if you have the budget and you can meet once only, I'd say it's at the kickoff, because that's when you can see eye to eye, build the relationships, create some agreed upon principles and norms and ground rules.
Mm-hmm.
I find that once you meet in person, then when you go back to your respective locations, it is far easier to get work done and more enjoyable and faster, because you've had that foundation, even if it's a day. So I'd say that would be, if I had one choice, it'd be a team startup. And then another would be if there is, let's say, you've achieved this huge milestone that no one thought you could, and you have a celebration and get together for some socialization, celebration, and perhaps in the same breath, you could do a project kickoff for the next project. And I'd say the third reason is if there's a really heavy decision to be made that's going to affect the lives and the professional roles of everyone in the organization, and you really need to do some brainstorming, decision-making, action planning really intensively, I'd say that's another time to meet face-to-face.
So I want to get to Gail's question. Thank you, Ben, for that. Gail has been a manager for a long time, and she said, if I had an issue with a direct report, I'd call them into my office to resolve it. That's when we were all co-located. Co-located. Thank you. I know that word. I don't know why I skipped it. But how does effective confrontation happen when team members are virtual, when they're distributed?
I love that question, because I have a few different answers. One is, Gail, if it's in a meeting, and if, let's say, one of your team members is disrespectful or disruptive, or otherwise demonstrating dysfunctional behavior, I'm a believer, if it's a team that you have a relationship with already and they with each other, I'm a believer in not taking it offline if it's in the meeting, but in diplomatically and assertively naming the behavior and talking about how that behavior has affected our goals of the meeting and our team members. So that's one answer. And there, I have lots of ways to do that, and I can share that with Dan later. And I have materials on that. But the other is, if it's this ongoing issue and there's some team member that is a problem, whether they're not performing, whether you can tell they're disenfranchised and not participating, I think in a virtual world, what I like to do is to make, depending how you usually communicate with the person, but send an IM or an email or a text and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes to talk tomorrow? Just want to catch up with you. So give them a heads up. I don't just like cold call. And then have a note paper and pen and shut everything else down so you can really listen intently. And using non-evaluative language, very descriptive, really specific about what the behavior is or what the problem is, and then pause, let silence be your friend, and then get some affirmation or some response from them, and talk them through. I'd say ask a number of questions. It is so tempting as a virtual leader to give a solution because that's efficient. I don't have to think. I don't have to hold your hand. I'm going to tell you what to do and just do it. They won't learn. They won't ever have the autonomy and agency they crave. But I'd say in the equivalent of calling someone into the office would be give them maybe a day heads up and just say, hey, I need you to drop everything tomorrow at 10. I want to catch up with some things. So maybe they have some idea what it's about.
I like the idea of calling out the action or the behavior without personalizing it. That comes out of really good social work. That's a best practice in psychotherapy, which is you never want to make it personal, but you want to redirect so that that person avoids whatever behavior or tic that they have that is causing some discord and get them to success. And then I would suppose you want to make sure you follow up once they have redirected perfectly and said, way to go. And because you did this, this is what happened. And perhaps show them all the positive attributes of what has happened.
I do want to add, the reason I feel pretty strongly about naming the behavior in the meeting, if you do it privately, take it offline, all the rest of your team members will believe that you accept that dysfunctional behavior, or that you didn't notice it, or that person is getting away with it, and this is violating their team norms. So I always think about the effect on all the team members if you ignore or seem to ignore dysfunctional behavior when it's happening.
So I want to deal with another aspect of the problems of leading a distributed team. And that is something that our friend Brittany Ratsmith, also a fellow member of the Future of Work Alliance, put up a couple of days ago on LinkedIn. I really like this discussion, the vibe versus visibility frame. And what she wrote is that what starts a vibe check culture, everyone feels great. You know, Joe seems like he's doing great. He's probably surface acting. So things must be working, but quickly it all breaks down when accountability isn't clear. And I'm wondering if you can expand on the vibe versus visibility framework and why it's important to make sure that you're not relying on your feels, because your feels could be wrong because that person is putting out energy on the Zoom call that makes you think they're doing fine, or they understand, or they're with you when they are not.
Oh, yes. So first of all, it's a lot harder to detect alignment, agreement, engagement in a virtual world. And especially if someone can cosplay being an energetic, high vibe team player, and you don't do check-in and you don't validate assumptions, you could be making it could be big trouble down the road when that person surprises you by either quitting or not doing their work. So I'd say a couple of things. One is you touched on accountability.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more challenging in a virtual world. And that is why I think one of the most important things a team leader can have in place with the help of his or her or their team is to create shared principles that are very explicit and that you talk through, well, what does it mean when we say, let's say we talk about psychological safety. We have an environment that is psychologically safe. Tell us what that means. Let's talk about, does that mean we are not afraid to ask for help? We can offer help without fearing that we're going to get more work piled on us. So what does it exactly mean? So the importance of having principles, and you mentioned your friend who was in the military,
Mm-hmm.
some of those strict frameworks or visible frameworks are super helpful in a virtual world. So I don't have to guess how I'm supposed to behave. But accountability, I think it's really critical that we all, everyone on the team, hold each other accountable for the behavior and the processes that we agreed to, whether it's status reporting, how we run meetings, how we participate in meetings. And that is much harder in a virtual world because I can't tell whether you're doing your work, how you're doing your work, the extent to which you're offering help to others in the group. So I think it's easy to put up the show of happy vibes. I'm nodding at the right times in all the meetings, but we have to validate that as leaders.
For the leader that you described who puts out energy that they know the right answer and they want you to follow it, I want to go against that and ask you, what happens when a leader doesn't know the answer to a question and he's involved in a group situation? How does the leader either go around the room and ask the team, okay, we've got this task. How would you suggest we go about executing it? Does that work effectively? And are there any issues within a distributed team setting that one needs to be mindful of to get the team to buy in with their own way of execution?
Well, first of all, I think asking for the brain power of the collective team, as in, I'm a leader, I don't have the answer, can I crowdsource this with all of you?
Right.
I think that is a great use of a team meeting because it gets everyone engaged. You're letting them know you value their knowledge and expertise and their brain power. So I think for a leader to admit they don't have the answer, or to admit they're wrong, but let's say they admit they don't have the answer, I think that's a great way of demonstrating the kind of vulnerability that builds that psychological safety so that others on the team can say, I don't have the answer to that. And it shows that you can draw on each other to get the ideas. So I think actually most team meetings should allocate at least a little time on a real life problem that either the team leader is facing or one of the team members is facing, and do some crowdsourcing. I think it's very energizing. It makes people feel good that they've connected and shared their knowledge.
How do you feel about when a team meeting is happening across a distributed workplace on Zoom or some other platform? How do you feel about assigning somebody within the team to be the meeting lead? Does that offer benefit? Does it offer empowerment?
Oh, I think rotating roles in general, let's say meeting roles, I think that's great. I think it's a great way to build that competency and confidence in the team members and help with their professional growth. A few caveats. One is not everyone feels comfortable facilitating or leading a meeting. I would try to encourage everyone to take that on, and that might come out in my one-on-ones with that person, which are very important in a virtual world. And so I think one of my clients had these great different roles for meetings, and he had a group spread all across North America. One is the host, the person who welcomes people, make them feel comfortable. One is the person who sets the agenda in collaboration with the team leader. My favorite task was the action master, and that person would, not an enviable task, I'll say, would follow up after every team meeting on all the actions. They would capture the actions in real time, read them out loud before the meeting ended, follow up with each person before the next meeting, and then would start the next meeting with the status of those actions. And that had one of the great benefits is you didn't get to the next meeting and then wonder if everyone forgot their tasks. Because in a virtual world, it can be easy to forget the commitments you made on that phone or in that Zoom meeting. So that action master really kept people kind of honest, kept them accountable, and that job was always rotated as well. So I think there are a number of roles within meetings that can stimulate professional growth and give people an opportunity to shine.
Anne submitted a question. Thanks, Anne. I'd love to learn how the characteristics of a great distributed team leader differ from an in-person one in a co-location. Or does Nancy believe it's more about how than the who?
I actually think it's both, Anne. I think there are attitudes and behaviors that make for a great distributed team leader that might be different. And then there's some skills. So I think starting with their attitudes and behaviors, I think one is that's different. Some of them are not that different from co-located team leaders, but are much harder. But ones that I think are really different is team communications. How, when, and where do we use asynchronous communication versus same time versus, let's say, do we have most of our exchanges in a real-time meeting once a week with a jam-packed agenda? Or do we set up async, maybe a portal or a Slack channel or other ways to communicate more easily and give people more choices to communicate? So I think the knowledge, the know-how about using a variety of communications and then creating the principles with the team that everyone agrees to, I think that's different than someone who's can just pop into someone's office every day. I think another one is what's harder and more important is to establish that sense of autonomy and confidence when I can't see how people are doing their work. I can't see where they're struggling on a day-to-day basis. So that requires much more frequent communications with each team member. I always suggest, depending how big the team is, but for your direct reports, at least one-on-one once a week and make them sacrosanct. So that's something that if I'm in person, it can be in the caf, we can meet in the gym. In a virtual world, that has to be really carefully choreographed. And then coaching skills, I think, are tremendously important for all leaders. But in a virtual team, I think we need to be more curious. We need to have questions ready that are not like, what did you do this week? But hey, tell me about what you're proudest of this week and how you solved it. So I think it's that natural curiosity, the willingness to coach. I'm not using the word mentor because that means somewhat different thing. And I think when we think about new people coming on board, whether they're new to the company or new to the team, that requires a whole different thought process when we're in a virtual world. That you have to be more thoughtful about who do they need to meet, what do they need to participate in, who's going to be their buddy, and I'm going to need to work with that person a lot more.
From your work, do you have an opinion on the appropriate size of a team? I had a guest on a couple of years ago who I think said it shouldn't be more than can sit around a table and eat a pizza. I said, how many people is that? He said about 7. Does he have a point there? Does any more than that create an overwhelming structure that a team lead just can't fulfill?
I believe that let me start with conversations. I think to have an in-depth, meaningful conversation, it's very difficult to do with more than, I always say 6 to 8 people. So I'll use the 7 as the number. And so I do think as a team leader, when I was working for a big company and had people working for me, I think 7 would have been the sweet spot. It's really hard to have those one-on-ones, those check-ins, to give that kind of support and autonomy to each person. And especially in a distributed world, we have to spend more time with each person.
Mm-hmm.
We have to check in more often. So I think 7 feels right to me. I think when you have 10 or 12 or 15 people you have to do performance reviews for and have to check in with so often, I think that becomes unwieldy.
So one question I was wondering about, and perhaps it's informed by the fact that for 20 years, I tended to recruit very traditional people, and they were rugged individualists, many of them. You know, it's about me, it's about my ability to lead a team, but it was all I and me and so forth. I would imagine you have guided along several people that were admittedly old school in their behavior and intent. But what has surprised you along the way, and what has really pleased you in how one-time traditional managers became real-time intentional leaders?
That's a great question. I think one thing I wanted to touch on, so this leads into it, is I've done a lot of work with global teams. I lived in Hong Kong for a short time, but I was doing work internationally for a long time and still do. And I think one of the things that has surprised me the most in a good way is how and I'm going to say, because I'm American managers who go overseas thinking that they're going to implant their American ways of leadership, management style, communications, how quickly humbled they become when they realize that what the assumptions they made about what, let's say, a French team member is looking for in a manager is so polar opposite to what the American manager feels comfortable doing. So I've seen some of the most radical transformations and sudden transformations be, and it goes both ways. It could be when I do a lot of cross-cultural training, when a Japanese manager or a manager from India comes to the US, and to see like all their ways of doing work in their culture. They could have been the most effective leader in France and India in Boston, and it can fall flat when you have a global team. So I think that's been one of my best surprises, is how humble they become and curious to learn very quickly, and can make that transformation pretty quickly with the right support and training.
I think American executives, and Americans in particular, so closely identify their American dream with the success that they have in the workplace. And why do I feel that way? Well, when you go on vacation in Europe and you're on a tour that's full of American tourists and they're meeting some of the locals, invariably one of the first questions they're going to ask is, well, Jens, what do you do? And I remember the tour guide would redirect, and say, you don't start with that. That's not how people in the Netherlands relate to their day. Is it tougher often for American executives to make the pivot than perhaps people in other cultures because of that?
I absolutely think so. I think a lot of Americans have rarely traveled outside of the country, whereas especially in Europe, you have so many contiguous countries that people are going back and forth in all the time. But I want to build on what you just said about the conversation about work. One of my favorite books of all time is called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And she has these spectrums of where different cultures fall in relation to different dimensions of teamwork. And the one on trust is the one that has been the biggest eye opener for a lot of my clients, because here I'm saying on my left side, are the cultures that assign trust based on, did you do the work you said you'd do? Can I check it off the list? Were you on time? And then way over on the right side are the cultures that build trust first by building relationships and by finding out more about the whole person. And I had a situation where I was running a retreat for CIO of a big Boston software firm. And the American managers were really ready to fire the whole team in India. They were so frustrated that they couldn't get what they wanted from the Indian team, who in turn was frustrated that the Americans were asking for ridiculous things. So that we were all in a room together, and I hid the countries, and I said, which of the cultures in this room do you think build trust by the checklist versus relationships? And they all had guesses, and then I revealed, and oh my God, there was such a gasp in the room, and then nervous laughter. They realized why they were so far apart. It's because the Americans valued on time, and the Indian team badly wanted the relationship they weren't getting. So I think when we work in distributed teams that are global, it's so vital to know how our own culture is going to be received, and then what the other culture needs and wants and expects, and then to create a team culture that forms bridges across all cultures.
So, Nancy, I'm going to touch the third rail of the subway line and get electrocuted, but I don't care.
All right.
Here we are in the second week of April, and one of my closest friends in the business world basically said, we're living Kafka right now. We're in a Kafka-esque experience. And as Americans, some of the people I'm talking to who have international engagements are saying that the tension with their colleagues is palpable, because perhaps it means that those people across the pond are going to lose their jobs. That's a fear. That resources that have been distributed internationally are going to come back to the United States, but they don't see how it's going to happen. How do your practices help to, I mean, I can't solve this. This is a train wreck, but how do your practices at least help create the communications efforts that do what you did in that room when you covered up all the responses and people got to see who's feeling what? How do you get that humanity back into the game right now?
I think that's a great question. And what I'm going to say probably applies to whether the teams are co-located or distributed. And that is to acknowledge, and this goes back to trust building too, and making yourself vulnerable, but starting a meeting, let's say, with talking about, let's talk about, the elephant on the table, or whatever term we want to use. Here's how I'm feeling right now. I've got concerns, and it might be I've got a family member here and this and that. Let's talk about what's on your mind. So I think to put it on the table, and if it's a excuse me, let's say if it's a team meeting of, I don't know, let's say it's an hour, say for the first 10 minutes. So kind of give a time frame. Let's talk about what's going on for each of us. If that doesn't feel comfortable, or if some team members are maybe on such a different side of the spectrum as the rest, maybe ask them in your one-on-one. But I think I just read this morning in The Guardian, that's one of my favorite publications, about several Irish villages that will absolutely basically close down if pharmaceutical tariffs are kept in place. And so we think about the ripple effect. We think, oh, tariffs, well, how does that affect me? Well, it's affecting people around the world. So I think to have the conversation about what's on your mind, like, what do you know? I like to ask people, what are their sources of news? Because I think that tells me a lot about what we can talk about and what we can't. But I just think it's important these days, especially if we're in America, but if we're part of a global team, to acknowledge what's going on rather than avoid the conversation. And if someone doesn't want to participate, they don't have to.
But at least it clears the air and perhaps mitigates some of the tension in the room that people are feeling, because, I don't want to tell you what I'm feeling because I don't want to come across as impolite, but I'm worried about my job here in County Cork or whatever. By the way, you mentioned pharmaceutical, and I immediately thought back to the days when my wife and I were trying to get pregnant, and we were getting all our IVF drugs from where? Ireland. What's going to happen now with tariffs? I mean, this is it's the everyday stuff that is invading the workday. And I really like how you've laid out the opportunity to at least have a discussion so that it shows we're all being human about this. We're all caring about each other, but at least we're laying it out all on the table, because you know what, you may not know what your friends across the pond are thinking, that your friends on your distributed team.
I'll find out in
A few
less
hours.
than 24 hours.
Right.
One thing I want to mention too is the idea of office hours.
Mm-hmm.
So these conversations, like the ones we're talking about, I think it's really important for a team leader of a distributed team, choose a time that is mutually convenient / inconvenient for everyone. So if you have a team that has wide swath of time zones, pick a time, let's say Monday at 9, whatever it is, and just say, I'm having my office hours. There's no required attendance. You can show up with your breakfast, and it could be lunchtime too. You can show up to discuss, you want to crowdsource something, or you want to go over an issue and you want some resources. I'm here. I don't care if there are 5 people on the team come, 1 person, or nobody. If nobody comes, I can be doing my work while my video's on. But I think having, excuse me, a regular time of office hours of an hour, but I wouldn't make it much less than that, where people can come in. This is your virtual open door. So if you had an office, this would be your cubicle or your office with the door open. But I think especially these days when someone may not bring something up in a fairly open setting like a team meeting, I think to have those casual drop-in conversations, and don't cancel them. You don't know people don't have to sign up. They don't have to come prepared, but just always have them. And I'd say at least once a week. I mean, if you can't, every other week, but I think that they and one-on-one should be sacrosanct.
So much of what you're discussing, I wonder, the values, the positive ideation, the positive values that come out of it, do they stay within the team or do they percolate up to the C-suite? And I ask that because I still feel there is so much posturing now. It's not just RTO, but it's basically everything else. I think within the C-suite, how their teams operate is probably not even in the top 10 of what they're up at night worried about. They're worried about quarterly earnings. They're worried about interest rates. They're worried about, the after hours market for their stock trading and so forth. How can a manager express the positive delta story that comes out of their teams in a way that the C-suite will say, you know what? We should listen to them more often. We need to bring them in. We need to listen to them more because they are the ones who are driving P&L in our company. They're the ones who are scaling revenue and opportunity.
Well, that's a great question. It's made more challenging when it is a distributed team and when the senior leadership is distributed as well, which is often the case for a lot of big global companies. So I think, how does it percolate? I'd say it's through stories. It's through talking about maybe inviting a senior leadership team member to a team meeting to talk about this celebration you're having for the Herculean efforts these team members just had. Or it's asking, one practice I love that a lot of companies do is have executive breakfast, where each senior executive has breakfast with random people. I mean, random, there's some way that the people are picked. And then everyone gets a chance to be with the executive for maybe every quarter. The executive has a breakfast. But I think it's by telling and sharing stories, asking for a seat at the table at some of the meetings, if that's appropriate. If it's an all hands meeting, find out who's running it and seeing if you can influence the agenda with some good news, because I really think a lot of people are starving for good news. both within their companies and certainly outside of our companies.
Yeah, despair is a very terrible place to start the day. And that's why I brought you on as a guest, because here you are, you have dealt with multiple instances of world disorder. I know you started your business in '94, but that was in the wake of the Gulf War and a lot of changes in how office structures happen. Then we had 9/11, and then we had COVID. So you have come into situations of crisis, and then from that alchemy has come beautiful outcomes that would not have happened if it were not for the crisis.
Yeah, I mean, for example, our ability to work remotely and hybrid. I really don't think we'd be at this stage if it hadn't been for COVID. I mean, before COVID, I'd say 70% of my work was still virtual because that was my expertise. So I practiced what I preach. But during COVID, of course, all knowledge workers anyway, or most, except if you have to be in a lab or some other situation, went remote. And I think it was that crisis that totally transformed our workplace. I think AI is another opportunity for, could be crisis or transformation, that I think a lot of companies right now are struggling with. How am I going to use it? What if I don't? I don't know what are our guardrails, et cetera. And now with the financial crisis, this worldwide financial crisis, I think 2008 financial crisis maybe pales in comparison to what we're seeing now. So I don't think any of us have any idea how it's going to turn out, but I think for sure it's going to mean a great loss of jobs and loss of personal wealth. So I think but I think as leaders, it's incumbent on us to really talk about what are the opportunities, because I can't remember the phrase in Chinese, but it's about opportunities come from crisis. And I think we have opportunities to think about, how do I want to change the way I work, maybe even what I do, but what kind of conversations do we need to have now as a team? I think they're probably going to be a lot more in-depth and meaningful. How can I learn? How can we learn from each other? I think we all have opportunities to learn every day.
Well, I think that's the opportunity. In 1987, 1 week before the stock market crash, I got a job as the account supervisor on an account running Dreyfus mutual funds. So I'm moving from another town back to the New York City area when I find out that the market drops 508 points in total calamity. But what happened after that was we developed stock market circuit breakers that would shut down the market if the market value dropped any more than, let's say, 6 or 7%. Okay, so that was government intervention. Now we go to 2008 financial crisis. Oh, that was a bad one, but government again came to the rescue, and they went to companies that did securities trading and said, well, guess what? You're now a bank. And it was unconventional, but it steadied the markets and equities increased, and we lived to see another day. I think what's puzzling people now, and it's really worrying them, and you want to talk about a 2 o'clock fever dream moment, is that for this time now, there doesn't seem to be a regulatory response in the works, other than maybe something that the Fed chair could do, but I don't see anything right now. So we have two choices, Nancy. We can despair, or we can say, okay, so how are we going to deal with this? And now we get on a team level, and it really lights a fire under our rear ends to say, it's really now up to us to effect positive change. So that's, I think, that could be the secret sauce going forward with how companies operate. It's going to be through brazen experimentation, allowing things to fail, celebrating failures, but then turning those failures into learning that creates better outcomes. And maybe those will bubble up to the corporate level and transform how we do business. That's my hope.
I agree. And to add to that, so as a team, if I'm a team leader, what can we do in our own little worlds? Whether it's our little world as our team, it may be taking on a new mentee in the organization, consciously looking for new hires and asking how they're doing, and then as a team, we can also look for community service activities. I know for me, I've always done a lot of pro bono work in my community, but I'm like asking. I told the food pantry executive director this morning, I'm here. What do you need help with? Do you want help with fundraising? I think we all feel so helpless in a macro level. So let's think about, either as a team or as individuals on the team, what can we do for someone else today? And how do we make someone else's life a little better, whether it's here in our group, my colleague in Ukraine, or my next door neighbor?
Well, Nancy, you've ended us on a high note. Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. Before we get to our final question, I'm wondering if you could point our viewers and listeners to where they can find you on social media to learn more about the work that you do, or to perhaps have a conversation. Where would they find you?
My website is guidedinsights.com.
Mm-hmm.
My email is nancy@guidedinsights.com. And then on my website, there's a sign up for my communique. It's a monthly newsletter I send free to subscribers. It's loaded with tips and links to all sorts of materials and templates and ideas. And honestly, I'm very responsive to email, maybe not in the next week, but typically I am. So, and I'm on LinkedIn as Nancy Settle-Murphy. So I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn as well.
Wonderful. Let's get to our final question, which is, what's your work fit? So Nancy, what attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes the work that you do a wonderful part of your day, doing many wonderful and meaningful things, and not the all-consuming time suck of a day? What's your work fit?
My work fit is when I have an environment. First of all, I love a clean slate day, or a flexible day. I always want to make at least a few connections for people, whether that's me connecting to someone, but better yet, connecting like-minded people to each other. It's when I have some opportunity to learn from someone else instead of me doing the same old thing every day, or to take on an assignment that is out of my comfort zone because I need to do more of that. And then it's a day where I can at least spend some time doing some physical activity, and preferably with my dog, who always appreciates that. So I'd say that it's having some flexibility, some malleability in my schedule, and an opportunity to have conversations, because working from my home office for 31 years, I really appreciate having face-to-face or phone calls with people.
I agree. I've been working virtual about the same amount of time. I think I started in 95. And it's really important to create a structure where you get out and be among humanity. If it means doing the groceries, picking up the dry cleaning, if you own a home, doing yard work, or I used, back in my days in Connecticut, I had a front yard perennial garden. I love that. And it also created an opportunity for me to meet neighbors. So that was my original work fit.
I tell you, I'm an avid gardener, and even weeding, I don't usually like, but now I use it as a metaphor for kind of removing things I don't need in my life. So I even like weeding now.
So Nancy, can we bring you back at some future time to continue this conversation?
I'd love to come back. I really appreciate the invitation. It's been great. And I bet I have a lot of questions for you I didn't get to. So yeah, we could do that next time.
Wonderful. Bon voyage. We'll see everybody again next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.